I'm John Fitzpatrick, Regional Vice President with John Hancock, and we are honored to be invited today to present to the group coming off of the Women in Finance roadshows that were so successfully done earlier in the month with our friends at CAFL and at OWR. I was lucky enough to be at one of those meetings, and John Hancock was one of the main sponsors as a partner, and I thought the meetings was just phenomenal, the one I attended, and I know the other two were just as good. So this is sort of to continue that momentum with your group and for Women in Finance. So we've got a great agenda today, and we are very blessed to have with us today two of my colleagues, Mark Berry, who is Vice President of Life Insurance Sales with John Hancock, and Tracy Ulam, who is one of our advanced markets attorneys and general counsel for John Hancock. And the one plug I can tell you is I work very closely with both Tracy and Mark, and I get to travel with them extensively and present extensively with them. And this is going to be a great meeting. And I think you're just going to love what you're going to hear today. Rich in content and very applicable to your practice and to your business for your clients. So with that, Mark, I'm going to bring you up and take over, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, John, and it really means a lot to all. I know I speak for all of us from John Hancock. It really means a lot to us that you have us on these meetings. So thank you for that. So what I want to cover today is something that I find fascinating personally, and that's this idea of retirement. And I pay attention to surveys of retired people, and it's interesting that as people get I guess when they're retired, they get asked a lot of survey questions, and they seem to answer them too. And one survey question, though, that does pop up occasionally goes something like this. It asks them, what was your number one financial surprise about retirement? Right? The number one financial surprise. And I always expect it to be healthcare. That's what I would think. It would be the price of healthcare, or maybe the price of golf. Because if you golf every day, versus once a week, it's got to be expensive. But time and time again, the same answer comes up, and it's taxes, right? It's really fascinating. So their biggest surprise at retirement is taxes, which I find fascinating because I know during their accumulation years when they were working, they paid taxes. We're all paying taxes. And so what is it that happens at retirement that makes taxes such a surprise? And so that's what this is. This is really a way, by using a very simple napkin presentation. That's what you're going to see here. We're going to take a blank piece of paper. We're going to draw a very simple drawing, but we're really going to have this conversation with a client. This is a way to do that about what these coming surprises are at retirement and what can we do about them now to prepare them. So if you want to tear off a blank piece of paper, what you should see is literally a blank screen in front of you. And this is our blank piece of paper. And this is how I used to present it to my clients. I would draw a line up here at the top, and I would put their income right here. And so as I'm talking to clients about saving for retirement, obviously I need to know what their income is. And a lot of them already knew their income if they were my clients, so I would put it here. But if you don't know it, just ask them, right? How much we got to work with here. So my typical clients are the same people. First is a 45-year-old male. His name is Henry, and you've probably heard this acronym before. It stands for High Earner, Not Rich Yet. But I also want to introduce you to Lisa, his counterpart. Lisa it stands for Large Income, Saves a Lot, right? And so you got both male and female here, same idea. They're both 45. And how does Henry and Lisa save for retirement? What are they doing right now? Well, if they have access to a qualified plan, that's usually the first place they're going to go. So this is, of course, the IRAs and the 401ks and SEPs and Simples and whatever's out there. Always good to know this number. What's the maximum that they can put into a 401k this year? It's a really good number to know. And some of them are probably starting to hit these numbers this time of year. This year, the maximum that Henry and Lisa can put in is $23,000. So that's the maximum amount in a 401k. Of course, if they're 50 or over, they can put more in. This year, that's $30,500. But this $23,000 is important because whatever qualified plan they have, there's a limit. But the 23 here for Henry and Lisa at the income levels we're talking about, all puns intended, that's a drop in the bucket. You know, they could put a lot more than 23,000 away here, and yet the federal government limits them on how much they're even allowed to put there, which really sets up a nice story for us then to help them finish saving, because that 23 I don't think is enough. That's not exactly how they want to end it. So they put the 23 in, but before they can get to us, there is this major intervention now that I call the IRS. And if you've never done this before, fun parlor trick here, write the words the IRS and put them very close together, and you'll see what that spells. And it's interesting because this money is theirs and it's treated that way. So, and I'll just make it personal. So as a W-2 employee at John Hancock, I don't see this money and then pay it to the IRS each paycheck. This money is actually withheld. So I don't ever get it. They come and get it before I get to it. And because of the way that works, there are even surprises here that a lot of people may not know that are coming at them even now. And I'm going to show you a few here in just a moment, some basic things. But I think comedian Chris Rock, way before he was slapped by Will Smith years ago, he once said this, and I think it's pretty profound. He said, "You don't pay taxes, they take taxes." And I think for Chris Rock, that's pretty good. And that's actually what's happening here. This money is taken. And so now that that's taken, everything on this drawing is after tax. Okay, so qualified, pre-tax, everything from now on is after tax. And the first place they're going to go, of course, is this beautiful bucket that we all try to manage for them. And this is that world of stocks, bonds, mutual funds, whatever investment opportunities there are to help them grow their wealth, right? And the beautiful thing about this bucket really is two things. One is the literal plethora of ways to invest money here. It's much bigger than a typical 401k, right? Your 401k usually gets some mutual funds, maybe a company stock. I mean, there's a lot of ways to invest money out here. The other thing I like about this bucket is there's no government imposed limitation on how much can go in. So Henry and Lisa are free to put as much as they want. Again, though, this is after tax. So what's left, they're free to put as much as they want. Here's the only issue with this bucket, and it's this nagging little hole in the side that's leaking tax. And this is the form of capital gains tax or income tax, dividends, whatever it is, right? They're paying tax as they go. So for most people, believe it or not, this is a very simplified picture of their retirement plan. This is it. They might have a qualified plan, then they put some money somewhere else, and they're hoping for the best at retirement, right? Now, for Henry and Lisa, as they get to be wealthy, we introduce them to another insurance product known as annuities. Some of you may deal with annuities. The nice thing about annuities, what I personally like, and I think most people do, is that tax deferral thing, right? That the ability to grow money tax deferred. You're not paying tax as you go. Now, if you have a qualified annuity, simply put that on the left bucket under qualified, because at retirement, an annuity that's qualified acts exactly the same when you're taking money out as anything else over there. So qualified annuities go on the left. Anything that's non-qualified goes in this bucket right here. And now we've got what many would consider a beautiful retirement plan, well diversified. We are rocking and rolling. But here's what matters on this drawing. None of this even matters. I mean, it kind of does. But the real important part is this dashed blue line that I just drew at the bottom here. That is the day that they retire. And the way this drawing works is everything above this line is the accumulation phase. That's what they're doing now. They're accumulating. But when they cross this line, when they retire and go below this line, they go to the distribution phase of their life. And my message to them is always the same. At retirement, it doesn't matter what you're worth above this dashed blue line. What matters is what you're worth below this dashed blue line. And I think it kind of sets up one of the surprises is that we're always looking at a false number. All of us do. And I used to do something my clients asked me to do. I was a planner years ago, and they wanted a net worth calculated, and I would do that. The problem with net worth is that number I gave them was above this dashed blue line. And I'll give you a great example. If they had a $2 million IRA, I gave them credit for being worth $2 million. But we all know this. That is not worth $2 million when you take it out. There's unpaid tax on that. The other example is $600,000 of Coca-Cola stock, for example. Let's say they bought it at $100,000. Well, there's some capital gains there waiting for them to try to sell that. So I put 600,000 as their worth. That's not really the number. What we've fallen prey to is we're using the IRS number for our net worth, our accumulation. And that's a big surprise, I think, for people too, is that they just haven't thought about that. They look at their statements and they think they're worth more than they are. I mean, that's just, I hate to say that, but so let's talk about though these taxes that are being paid now. We're going to talk about them later in a minute here, but right now under theirs, I'm going to put federal income tax. So Henry and Lisa are paying a federal income tax. They're also, depending on what state they live in, paying a state income tax. And then there's this sneaky little tax here. So there's a Medicare tax on almost all of us, 1.45%. Okay. But as Henry or Lisa gets to income increases, when they hit income levels of 200,000, or for a married couple filing jointly, 250,000 of income, there's this additional 0.9% withheld from the paycheck. Now, what's nice here is they don't have to worry about notifying the IRS. As a very convenient service, the IRS will automatically withhold that. So you don't have to think about it, you don't have to worry about it. The IRS has got your back. The S in IRS is service, and they provide a nice service here. They will come and get that money automatically, right? So no worries there. But a lot of people don't know that's happening. I think the most fascinating part, though, of the current tax code is SALT. And SALT stands for state and local tax. And this is a big one. It used to be, prior to the current tax code, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, prior to that, Henry or Lisa could write off an almost unlimited amount of state and local tax on their federal forms if they itemized on their Schedule A. Okay. Now, what's happened is with SALT, as many of us probably know by now, it's limited to $10,000. Well, that's a big deal for those people in these high income tax states. And let's take a look at the map of the United States. And this is by income tax. So the darker the red, the higher the state income tax. Okay. And I'm sure all of your eyes obviously go to the far left there. You can see California at a whopping 13.3% top state tax rate. So just think about that for a minute. Let's say Henry or Lisa, they live in California, okay, and they make, I don't know, $100,000. Well, it's not exact, but just think about that for a second. They're paying, it could be close, it's over 10,000 for sure. Let's say it's 13,000. But there's a number there where they're going to hit and easily exceed the $10,000 limit. And I would say somebody in California making 100,000, 120,000, I wouldn't consider them doing extremely well, right? And so you can see where SALT really affects people in those high income tax states, because it's limiting their ability now to write off taxation that they've already paid to states. But let's look at states that don't have income tax. I live in the beautiful state of Florida. No state income tax here. I would encourage everybody on this call to please visit Florida as much as you can. Come see our beaches, our parks, ride some rides, spend lots of money, because we're taxing you, of course. So that's how we get around that. But Texas, I don't know if anybody's in this call is from Texas, but I want to look at Texas for a second, because Texas also has no state income tax. So if Henry or Lisa lives in Texas, they probably think everything's great, right? Because they don't have to worry about SALT. But you got to remember what SALT stands for: state and local tax. Well, what is local tax? Well, that's property tax. So I'm going to switch this map from state income tax to property tax, and I want you to watch Texas. Okay, so it's a big deal. It's not the worst, okay, but it's way up there. I mean, Texas makes up for that lack of a state income tax with property tax. And do you think that Henry's and Lisa's out there might have a nice car or two, maybe a nice home, some property, maybe a ranch, right? There's where the SALT thing gets them, right? And the point of this is that SALT is so brilliant because it says state and local, right? You add those two together, you're limited to $10,000. So really, SALT is a brilliant piece of work, I think, by the tax code writers, because what they were able to do when it was passed is the Congress people came out at the podiums and they said, we did not raise taxes on Henry and Lisa, which they didn't. They didn't raise taxes, but what they did do was they limited the ability for them to write taxes off which raised revenue, right? It's all in semantics. It's all how you talk about it. So anyway, SALT is very fascinating and a sneaky one, I think. At the taxable bucket, two things happening there. The top capital gains rate remains at 20%. As of now. And there's also the Affordable Care Act, which is still there, this 3.8% tax on unearned income. And it's triggered at income levels of 200,000 or 250 for joint filers. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it's the identical trigger moment for the additional Medicare tax as well. So, people in your book of business making over 200,000 or 250 need to understand there's a target on their back. They're expected, it's their civic duty really to pay more tax. And that's exactly what they're doing now. Now, here's the thing about all of this. This does not explain, though, the surprises yet at retirement. So let's talk about that. So what's the difference? Let's fast forward 10 years. And now, and I'm going to put age 55 under the qualified bucket over there. And Henry or Lisa came to you, they're your client, and they said, hey, I'm 55. I want to retire early. You told me I have a great net worth. I think I can retire early. I don't know if you saw what I just did. It was kind of sneaky. I added spigots to these buckets because if you start telling me you're going to take money out of them, these buckets change. They are no longer accumulation vehicles. They are now distribution vehicles, right? Now it's going to change. This is where some of the surprises start happening. But the first one here, of course, at 55 is they're talking about retiring early and withdrawing money early before 59 and a half. And so there's a couple of buckets here they got to be careful doing that from if they don't want to pay that extra 10% early withdrawal penalty. Obviously, the qualified bucket on the left, but many don't know this, even gains on annuities. As they start pulling those out, they could pay a 10% penalty on that as well. So the issue, though, is this. Where are the retirement assets sitting? In these three buckets, the places that the money's been sitting waiting for this day are those two buckets right there, those very two buckets. And so anybody thinking about retiring early, I would always cringe and really, I think you need to have a conversation about that. If they're talking about retiring early, let's just make sure, because if most of their assets are in a qualified plans, that could cause some real issues without some doing a few exercises to get it out of there. But here's a bigger surprise. Age 59 and a half. And I love this. John, I know you and I have been meetings together. I love we're in front of people. I'll ask the room if anybody knows why it's a half. Why is it 59 and a half? And no one ever seems to know. And I'll tell you, I don't know either. I just think it's funny because it's a date that no one knows when that is. It's just such a sneaky little thing. But let's just think about this. Whatever day that is, and personalize it for a minute. Whatever day that is for you, that's the day that you are old enough and mature enough to get to your own money. Okay, so congratulations. But let's talk about this. But here's what happens on that day. And 59 and a half, let's say you open up that qualified spigot, start pulling money out, you create something called AGI, adjusted gross income or ordinary income. Now, here's a surprise, right? Because people think, okay, I've retired. I don't have to worry about income tax anymore because I'm not making any income. Well, if you're pulling money from a qualified plan or even gains on annuities, I put the AGI under there. That's exactly what that is. That is income. Matter of fact, the very first penny pulled from a qualified plan is income taxable, right? And so I think that's a surprise. I don't know if people really thought about that. What I would tell my clients is at age 59 and a half, where that bucket says qualified tax deferred, just scratch out the word deferred, because what it becomes now is a qualified tax bucket, because every penny you take out is just like you're working and still paying. And by the way, everything in red on here is triggered by AGI. So I think that's a surprise. I just don't know if people really thought about exactly what that means, but it gets better because at age 62, they become eligible for that other pile of their money known as Social Security. And Social Security is interesting because, yes, it's your money, but many people may not know this until it gets there, that it's taxable. Up to 85% of your Social Security check can be taxable. Well, what triggers taxation on Social Security? Well, many people would say AGI, right? Adjusted gross income. Well, yes and no. That's not exactly the complete answer. The complete answer, you got to add an M up there. I don't know if you saw that or not, what I just added. Maggie, or around Christmas time, I pronounce this Magi, right? But MAGI, modified adjusted gross income. Well, what is that? Well, that's adjusted gross income plus some other incomes. And the best one, my favorite, is municipal bond income. Muni bonds are income tax free, right? The money coming, the income from those, they are income tax free. Yet you still have to report it to the IRS, even though you're not paying tax on it. Well, who cares, right? Well, this is when it matters, because they take that reportable income and add it to AGI to create something known as modified adjusted gross income, and they use that number against you to determine when to tax Social Security. Slick, slick, slick. Again, I get the brilliance of our tax code amazes me, but it keeps getting better, because now we're going to get to age 65. And this is the Medicare moment, right? Become eligible for Medicare. And all of you know this, Medicare comes in several letters. Medicare Part A is the hospitalization part, and that's free, okay? But Medicare Parts B and D have premiums to them. So D is, of course, the prescription part, but I want to focus on Medicare Part B. So Medicare Part B is the doctor part, and it's an important part of this. And there's a premium for Medicare Part B, and you have to look it up. So if you go to the website, and we're going to visit there in a minute, you will see that Medicare Part B for a 65-year-old is $174.70 a month. So let's take a visit to Medicare.gov, and they have a very convenient table that they will post for you. You can go there yourself if you want to visit. And if you go all the way to the far right, the right-hand column, it says you pay each month in 2024. Okay, a 65-year-old pays, and it's that first number is what AARP magazine will tell you it is, $174.70 a month. And then, by the way, this is per person. So a married couple, each of them 65, each pay $174.70 a month. Unless, and you can see this very convenient chart, depending on your income level, you pay higher premiums. And as you can see here, this year that could be more than triple, depending on the income. A couple of interesting things about this chart. One is the last line, the last row was just added a few years ago. Okay, it used to not even exist. Can they add more rows? Absolutely they can. The other thing that's fascinating is that on the far right, those premiums are set each year by the Medicare system. So there's no passage from Congress on these numbers. That Medicare system just tells you each year, this is your premium. The best part, though, is how do they determine income? And I'll circle it for you at the top in case you haven't seen this yet. Right there it is, modified adjusted gross income. So again, all you muni bond players out there that think you beat the system, good luck with that. So, and then finally, the last one, 73. 73 is when we introduce them to a brand new acronym, maybe they never heard before, of course, RMDs, required minimum distribution. Now, in those three words, it is never said something like this: Henry or Lisa, we, the federal government, think you should withdraw this much money from your qualified plans to live the lifestyle that you desire. No, this has nothing to do with their lifestyle, their needs, or anything. It's forcing them to take money out. And we all know what that is, right? It's the forced taxation. So what you've got now, as you can see, is this beautiful web of taxation that's waiting on people when they retire. And we're all being encouraged, of course, to slam money in those qualified plans. And that's what we dutifully have done. I can tell you this, when I've sat with clients and talked about it, at this point right here in the conversation, they're slumped in their chair. They might have their arms crossed. They might even be angry. And they say something like this, you know, what was the point of this? Why are you telling me all of this? The point is this. I don't know if you notice at the top right, I left an arrow open because there is a fourth bucket that we could talk about that they could add. Okay. And this bucket I call the tax advantage bucket. And why do I call it that? Well, first of all, this is after tax money. Okay. But one of the advantages here is you can put as much as you want in this bucket too. No limit. The other nice thing is the money, when it's put in here, will grow tax deferred, which is good. But when you take money out of here, and if done properly, it will cross this dash blue line and come out income tax free. Now, as Martha Stewart used to say from prison, that's a beautiful thing. Because if you got income tax-free money coming out, now maybe you can manage taxation at retirement. But it's even bigger than that. And here's the punchline of the entire thing. If you haven't listened to a thing I've said, if you'll just at least listen to this part, maybe write this down. This is your big moment here. And it's this. Not only does this money come out income tax-free, but it comes out as non-reportable income. Now, why is that important? Well, let's start with federal tax under theirs. There's no federal tax on non-reportable income. There's no state tax either. And since it's not reportable, there's no Medicare or SALT anything on it. There's no capital gains on non-reportable income, nor can the Affordable Care Act get at it. And because it's not reportable, if you want to take it out at 55 or anytime before 59 and a half, no 10% penalty. At 59 and a half, of course, no income tax. And also, there's no effect on your Social Security taxation. There's no effect on your Medicare Part B premiums, and there's no RMDs. What we're talking to them about is something that at retirement neutralizes the tax code as we know it. Now, do you think they want to hear what we have to say next? Because there's two words I haven't said yet, and this is the two words. This is when you say it. This is life insurance, right? This is the LERP idea. This is that idea of using cash value life insurance policies in a little different way, taking advantage of the tax codes that are allowed, following the rules, cramming them full of cash, minimizing the death benefit, and really taking advantage of what's available there. And so it allows us then to supplement these other buckets. So we're not talking about replacing them. We're talking about adding this bucket to supplement all of them at retirement. So I'll end with these thoughts here of the hedging that's available. The first one I would talk about, and I've wrote it at the top right, is a tax hedge. And this is important, right? Because there's going to be years where managing taxes is going to be a big deal. But if you don't have this bucket to pull from, you have no choice. So for example, let's say it's November, and if they take another penny out of their qualified plan, they're going to go to the next tax bracket or the next Medicare Part B premium level, and they'd rather not. Well, what you do is turn that bucket off, use the tax advantage bucket for 1 month, and then on January 1st, everything resets back to zero. You can pull from the qualified plan again. You can see how we can use the tax code to our advantage for a change and take advantage of what they have given us. Without this bucket, you can't do that. The second one I'll mention is a longevity hedge. All of us have probably dealt with, or you will, deal with a long-term care chronic illness situation. Some of the riders now that are available, where you simply add them to life insurance policies, have become pretty powerful. And it's a way to manage that longevity risk. And just a real quick shameless plug for John Hancock. We have one of the riders, we have 3 different ways to do it. Our chronic illness rider, where there's no charge for it. You only pay for it if you use it, right? Great way to attach it to something where you're trying to accumulate cash value. There's no drain on it. The final one I'll mention is a time hedge, right? Henry and Lisa need time for all of this to grow. And I'll tell you a very personal story for me. So my father was killed in a car wreck when I was 7 years old. My brother was 5. And our mom didn't even have a job, right? Did my dad have time to grow any of these buckets? As a matter of fact, I'll tell you, he was 29 years old. I found out years later, he had zero, exactly zero in all 3 of those other buckets. And he didn't have life insurance either. What if he had had life insurance though? Even if it was a $10,000 death benefit, this was back in 1970, right? Think about that. So what would that have made a difference for my mom and my brother and I? Yes, it would have been a huge difference. And so what we're able to offer here too is a way that something that is a self-completing retirement plan, whether they're there or not, right? And of course, it's income tax-free death benefit. Huge story there, just a great story. So I'm going to end with this for what it's worth. We do have a really nice client-approved piece that talks about this. It's our, and you can see the QR code there in the bottom right if you want to pull it up. It's a digital version. You can print it. It's printable too. But it's a great piece, a very serious piece about everything I just talked about, but the different ages and what can happen with taxation. So with that, Kelly, I'll turn it back over to you to see if there's any final outbursts before we move on to the next thing.
Thank you, Mark. That was wonderful. I really appreciate it. I love that presentation. I gotta tell you, I use that information daily when I'm talking to advisors. So it is super helpful. Next we have Tracy. Tracy is from the advanced markets team at John Hancock, and she is Tracy, I'm gonna let you just start your presentation. They can learn what you're going to talk about.
Okay, sounds good. So today I'm going to actually shift focus. So Mark really talked about retirement, saving for retirement. I'm going to shift focus to talk about estate planning. So once Henry and Lisa have accumulated more wealth and they start looking at what happens after retirement or what happens, from there on, we're going to talk about kind of those opportunities and kind of what's coming down the pipeline, especially with big changes potentially on the horizon. So talking about what we like to call estate planning in uncertain times. So what we're going to really start with, though, is, with the cost of waiting, what happens for those clients that maybe aren't ready to move or aren't moving forward. This is really a big deal in our industry as far as, what is that cost? Why do we wait? Why do we know we should move forward, but kind of take that hesitancy and procrastinate? So I'm going to shift a little bit and we're going to talk a little bit more about biology before we get into the life insurance side of things. So we're going to do a little bit of a science lesson first. So why we procrastinate, what's the issue there, what happens is really a biological or scientific process that our brains go through. So we need to understand a little bit about that brain chemistry to figure out kind of why clients hesitate or why we procrastinate. So when we talk about the brain, we have the limbic system. This system essentially is that side of the brain, that unconscious pleasure center, the oldest and most dominant part of the brain. This will override pretty much everything that we do. This is that fight or flight response, or what we refer to as the lizard brain. Essentially that side of your brain that tells you to pull your hand away from a flame. So basic survival instincts and to flee from those unpleasant tasks. Combining that, procrastination is really an inherently animalistic response to things that are unpleasant or things that we don't want to accomplish today. So what we need to do is try to shift that focus into the prefrontal cortex. So essentially that conscious internal planner. So the opportunity to get into that side that helps us make those decisions and to move us forward, and really shift out of that fight or flight response into that prefrontal cortex response, that internal planner, the newer and weaker side of our brain. So if procrastination or putting off difficult tasks is really a human nature, when we're talking about why clients delay estate planning and life insurance planning, it's really kind of fascinating to think that these conversations become that difficult that it triggers that fight or flight or lizard brain response. But when that limbic system wins, we're putting off what should be done today for that temporary relief from an unpleasant feeling. And doing that in the life insurance and estate planning space can really have some detrimental effects. So what's at stake? What happens? Why is this so scary for folks? So when we talk about estate planning, again, we're talking about those uncomfortable discussions around mortality, indecisions about who gets what and how much and what's going to happen to everything that I own. For a lot of our clients, there's a lack of understanding or fear of complexity. So this conversation about they don't understand what's going to happen. And of course, folks like ourselves that work in this industry, we might start to talk in ways that they just don't understand, and they don't want to feel inferior or like they don't understand, or that they're not smart enough. So other folks have this desire to retain control, uncertainty, and especially right now, that future of the tax laws changing can add a level of uncertainty where we're just going to kind of wait and see what happens. Additionally, from the life insurance side, it's very similar. So we're again talking about uncomfortable discussions about mortality, that uncomfortable medical underwriting process. There's misconceptions around the cost of life insurance, having to pay for it, with those competing financial priorities, especially right now with the economy, and folks are having to start to kind of determine where their money gets spent. And again, for a lot of our clients, these types of conversations take time and take planning, but folks at younger ages may simply just see no reason, what's in it for them right now to talk about life insurance, what's in it for them at the moment to talk about estate planning. So when we allow these kind of uncomfortable pieces and the scary parts of these two conversations to come into play, we really start to see that procrastination and that flight response to having that conversation. So what's at risk if the lizard wins? So if from an estate planning perspective, if we don't undertake those conversations and put a plan in place, that leaves it to the courts or intestate laws get to decide. And those assets may not end up in the place that folks want them to go. So their goals, their wishes may be frustrated. Assets may go to people they never wanted those assets to go to, or they may have to just be sold in order to kind of effectuate other needs and other planning goals. Additionally, right now we're facing sunsets of the lifetime exemptions, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So that may result in additional state tax costs if we don't do the planning that we have available to us today. Additionally, we talk about, you know, the life expectancy from a tax perspective and tax laws. How many times are tax laws still going to change over their lifetime? And future tax law changes, you know, like we saw with potential changes to grantor trust rules, those changes we saw to the Secure Act may ultimately render tried and true estate planning techniques that we have available today completely ineffectual in the future. There's also some cases where people have rushed to plan. So a deathbed planning is never a great idea. Typically, we've had cases where the IRS will come in and essentially, you know, say that there wasn't enough time to actually make that planning happen, especially if we have folks that they're so close to deathbed planning or having, you know, competency issues. We run into risks of not being able to sign papers or having the ability to actually complete any planning at that time. Additionally, if we wait too long from a life insurance perspective, you know, we have that loss of insurability. The family continues to stay unprotective, and additionally increasing in cost. So if they're worried about the cost of life insurance, putting off to the future getting that life insurance in place that they need has a much bigger cost associated to it as well. So I love this quote. We talk a lot in our industry about assets. And one of the things that we don't often talk about when we talk about a personal asset that we all own is our insurability. And at some point in time, we all become uninsurable. We just don't know when that's going to be. So putting into context that our insurability is an actual asset that has a cost associated to it or a value associated to it that we just don't ever think about. And the fact that we might lose that asset at some point in time due to no fault of our own, and we just don't know when that's going to be. So using that asset when we have it, taking advantage of that before it's lost, because once it's lost, it really is impossible to get it back. So when we put that into more of a numbers, dollars and cents, we've talked a lot about the lizard brain and these kind of soft, you know, biological type conversations. So what does it all mean from the cost of waiting from dollars and cents? If we talk about a female who's 44 years old that needs $1 million of death benefit, as of today, she's looking at about $5,000 in annual premium for a UL protection product. If that same female waits 1 year and still needs that $1 million, we're talking about an 8.5% increase in that overall premium. So now she's got to come up with $5,500, almost $5,600 a year. So an increase there, which isn't significant, but it is an increase. Now, if that same person waits 5 years, again, still needing the $1 million, if they go from preferred to now a standard underwriting classification, we're looking at a $9,000 annual premium, about an 86% annual increase in premium costs. Now, if we think about, you know, with that procrastination, when do folks decide that they need life insurance? And a lot of times it happens once they've had a health event. That conversation that happens that, oh, now I need life insurance. The problem becomes they may not be no longer insurable in order to access that life insurance that they still need. So in that 5 years, if this same female for that same $1 million has an actual major underwriting change, suffered some sort of medical event or health event, we're now looking at a 144% increase to $12,000 annual premium. And that can really have an impact on the ability to plan and what's available to them. Also looking at those retirement assets that they've already put in play and where are those dollars going to come from. So a huge implication in putting kind of the numbers in play of what that cost actually is to waiting to having those conversations if we let that lizard brain win. So what do we do? So how do we create urgency? How do we get people kind of over that fight or flight response? And how do we get that prefrontal cortex to kick in and outsmart the lizard brain? So let's talk about kind of why it needs to happen now. What's kicking this into gear? Why is this so important, especially from an estate planning perspective today? So if we talk about what we're seeing in the marketplace as far as the estate tax exemption plummet, as of today, every individual has $13,610,000 of lifetime exemption that they can use before any estate taxes are actually going to be owed. What we do now with the sunset of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is that if Congress fails to act as of December 31st, 2025 or January 1st, 2026, that's expected to decline or get cut in half down to about $7.2 million. So there's a lot of folks that may not have an estate tax problem today, but will have an estate tax problem tomorrow. Also, for a lot of folks, that just increases the amount of estate taxes that they would owe if they don't take advantage of that lifetime exemption today. So one of the questions that I'm hearing in big conversation in the marketplace, and of course, is it actually going to happen? Is the sunset going to occur? And while I don't have a crystal ball, I really wish I did, and I wish all of us wish we did. But this really gives us a lot of talking points right now to have these conversations about, is it going to happen, and kind of pontifications of what's happening in Congress, what's going to happen with the election year. But there's really kind of two sides to the coin. So one school of thought that we're hearing is that historically with the estate tax, once it's been increased, it's never actually been decreased. Especially when we're talking about, folks in Congress and legislators looking at getting reelected, no party wants to be the party that comes in and implements the death tax. So estate taxes historically really only apply to, the top 1%. However, a lot of Americans, there's a misnomer that this death tax applies to more people than that. So even if it doesn't apply to anyone, or it doesn't apply to most Americans, there's still this misnomer or this connotation of the party of the death tax that politically doesn't lead into reelection very well. So it's one of those conversations that historically it's never been decreased once it's been increased. And again, there's this political capital involved in implementing or reducing that. On the other hand, there's a lot happening with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So if we think back to 2017, how this got passed was through budget reconciliation, which means that in order to make the 21% corporate tax rate permanent, all of the other pieces had to sunset because with budget reconciliation, it has to be budget neutral within 10 years. So that's kind of what we're facing. So it's not just the estate tax that's going to be sunsetting. Almost every provision of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act outside of that 21% corporate rate is expected to sunset. So this means that 199A deductions for pass-through entities is going to be sunsetting. All of the income tax provisions, so the standard deduction is going to get cut back in half. We're going to see the increase of personal exemptions come back in. The tax brackets are going to increase back to 39.6% and at a different marginal rates. So a much broader, more broad impact to the sunsetting Tax Cuts and Jobs Act than just the estate tax provision piece of this. So we're going to keep a close eye on the political landscape, the economic landscape, what we need to do from a tax perspective, from a budget deficit perspective, as far as what's going to change from tax reform. So it is expected that there's going to be a major tax reform push in 2025. So it's just waiting to kind of see what the hand is going to be as far as the negotiating chips, which side has which cards in the deck, so to speak, as to what's kind of in play for those negotiations. But what does it all mean? So let's just a quick back of the napkin math on all of this. So if we look at the planning response, so a person with a $20 million estate value today, modest growth to 2025 is about $22 million. Now, overnight to January 1st, that really doesn't change. However, what does change in that 1 minute or 1 second between 11:59 p.m. December 31st, 2025 to 12 a.m. January 1st, 2026, is that the lifetime exemption getting cut back down. What that ultimately means is that overnight, Uncle Sam gets $2.7 million more in taxes. The question is, where is that money coming from? So how are those heirs going to pay that additional $2.7 million that happened overnight? And how do we plan for that? And it doesn't really just end there. So, assuming that this client is 65 years old, what's the likelihood that they're actually going to die in 2026? More than likely, reality says life expectancy is about another 18 to 20 years later. So growth and appreciation in the estate is going to be much higher. So causing additional estate tax liability. Additionally, we're going to need that extra money within about 9 months after the date of death. Is that going to be a fire sale? What kind of assets and liquidity do the heirs have to cover that increase in cost? As well as, there might be some changes in health. So the ability to get him insured to give him that protection and liquidity today may not be there in 2026 or 2027. So the rational client says, yes, I understand I need to gift. I understand I need to take advantage of that lifetime exemption that's there today. However, the lizard brain and that fear kicks in. And even though there's the tax savings are there and they know they should do this, that tension and the fear of giving up control of those assets is very palpable and very real for most folks. So what do we do? So the conversation becomes, how do we overcome that lizard brain? So a couple different cases that we can talk about, those building blocks of flexible design: trust language, ownership structure, and financing techniques. So I'll give you each kind of an example of how we can utilize each one for different clients, depending on the objections that they may be facing or what's causing that lizard brain to kick in. So overcoming the client's objections, overcoming the lizard brain. So the client objection in this case would be, I need access to the money. Can I afford it? What if other known unknowns come into play? So that lizard brain is telling you that you need access to the money. And if things change, there's too many what ifs. What if, the withdrawal risk in retirement, inflation goes up, there's longevity, I need access, I need that money. So what we look to in those cases is typically the flexibility planning with trust planning, flexibility with spousal access trusts or SLATs. So in this case, the grantor spouse would establish an ILIT. The non-grantor spouse is named as one of the trust beneficiaries. The ILIT then purchases a single life policy on the grantor or the grantor insured spouse. And that gives the other uninsured spouse or the beneficiary spouse indirect or backdoor access to those funds, to the policy, should they need it during the life of the grantor spouse. So essentially gives them not only credit or protection by getting the trust, the gifts or those trust assets out of the estate, gives them the estate tax protection by having the life insurance owned, again, outside of the grantor's estate, but also gives them that indirect access via the spouse, and also gives the spouse access to those dollars through the trust at the death of the first spouse, while still maintaining it outside of her or his estate, as well as providing credit or protection for the surviving spouse as well. Ultimately then flowing down to the children or the grandchildren through those trust protections. So again, giving them the opportunity to access the funds should they need it, but also giving them the benefits of getting that gifting accomplished, taking advantage of high lifetime exemptions today, while still getting the life insurance that they need and taking advantage of insurability. So there are some considerations with this SLAT. These are typical things that come up. So reciprocal trust rules, we want to make sure that if both spouses are creating SLATs, that they're materially different enough so the IRS respects them as two separate planning opportunities. Additionally, we can potentially use survivorship policies in SLATs. We just want to make sure that the trust is drafted appropriately to allow for that as well. A big one that often comes across my desk is, what if we get divorced? In those cases, again, working with attorneys, some creative trust drafting, provision drafting can usually overcome that. I saw one case where it was too much. Instead of naming the spouse outright directly, they said, the beneficiary was my spouse if living with me at the time. So in that case, it was actually in Florida. the spouses had been separated. One spouse, the beneficiary spouse, tried getting access, and the court said, no, you don't get access. You've moved out. You no longer live with them. So again, very interesting, creative trust drafting can overcome some of these considerations, as well as overcoming some additional objections. So the second one we'll talk about real quick is ownership structure. So in this case, again, looking at flexibility planning. So what is overcoming that lizard brain again? Clients that say, I don't need a trust. I don't have an estate tax problem today, so I don't need to make a trust. I don't need to make gifts. I'm just going to kind of wait and see. Or in a lot of cases, they are doing trust planning, but the ILIT hasn't been finished yet, or it's still in the process of being drafted. So how do we help clients essentially give them a little bit more control and allow them the flexibility to plan a little bit later down the road? So what we'll do in these cases is essentially have those conversations about separating the wealth asset transfer plan from the liquidity plan. So we talk about the wealth asset transfer plan, we're talking about wills, we're talking about trusts, who gets what when. The liquidity plan is how we're going to fund that. Where's the money going to come from in order to effectuate or make that wealth asset transfer plan come to life? And the liquidity plan is really that's where the life insurance really comes into play. So in this case, we're going to focus really on that liquidity planning. In this case, we're going to use a credit shelter plus trust, or what's also called a bypass trust or a B trust. In these cases, they're funded with married couples who want greater control, those who may be below the high current lifetime state tax exemptions. The survivor standby trust is a great alternative ownership structure. So we're using a credit shelter trust created under the client's revocable trust, typically included with standard will planning. So the credit shelter trust is funded with the first spouse to die's remaining lifetime exemption. Sorry, got it. And then the beneficiaries of the trust is the surviving spouse, descendants, and potentially a charity. And when the surviving spouse dies, the entire trust value is excluded and sheltered from that spouse's estate. So we're talking about what we call the survivor standby trust. So in this case, we're going to purchase a survivorship policy. The policy is going to be owned by typically the older spouse or the spouse with the shorter life expectancy. The credit shelter trust is named outright as a contingent owner and beneficiary of that survivorship policy. The older spouse will continue to pay the premiums on that policy, but this allows the couple to retain the rights to the policy. So retaining the right to potential cash value, retaining the right to change ownership, to change beneficiaries, and essentially still have access personally to that policy while it's outstanding. So it gives them the option to kick the can down the road a little bit from an estate planning perspective. So what happens then when upon the death of the older spouse, or assuming that first to die? Well, in that case, if they still own the policy outright, it's just the fair market value that's included in the older spouse's estate. Because keep in mind, the policy death benefit isn't payable at that point in time. We're waiting for the second to die. So we're including the fair market value, which is typically much lower than full death benefit, in the older spouse's estate. So getting that discount or that reduction there for what's includable. At that time, the credit shelter trust takes ownership as the contingent owner of that policy. So that policy ownership is automatically transferred to the credit shelter trust at that fair market value and is now outside of the younger spouse's estate. The trustee then of that credit shelter trust controls the policy for the benefit of the CST beneficiaries, which is typically the surviving spouse, who will then now still have access to that policy. And then upon the older spouse's death, or the surviving spouse's death, the death benefit will be paid to that trust and then be available for the beneficiaries as well. So again, it just helps provide that flexibility and control today to give them the option down the road. So it does and again, at any point in time, if they decide that they do need trust planning, that they don't want the policy in either of their estates, we can sell it to an ILIT. Once that ILIT's drafted, we can get the policy moved into the ILIT as well. So it gives them a little bit more flexibility with planning down the road, while still taking advantage of their insurability today and getting the policy in force. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about is, idea number 3 for that flexibility, and that's really the wait and see approach. So in this case, for most of our clients, there's 2 options. They can jump in, they can make the gift, and for our high net worth clients, we're seeing a lot of folks really get into this now. I want to take advantage of those lifetime exemptions today, and I just want to be done with it. And a lot of other clients want to test the waters. They're looking forward to 2026 saying, I don't know what's really going to happen. These exemptions might get extended. I'm going to do my planning today, but I need some flexibility. I'm going to test the waters, place the case, but I want the ability to change my mind down the road, or to change routes, or to change directions. So in these cases, the conversation becomes, the objections are, I know I need to gift, but I'm just not ready to give up control today. Or in a lot of cases now, we're finding with clients that they've used their gift exemptions, or their gift exemptions are earmarked for something else, but they still have a liquidity need that we need to find a way to pay for. So in this case, we're going to look at a flexible funding options, or a funding technique. So again, these are those clients looking to take a wait and see approach. They do not want to liquidate or give up control of their assets. They're typically comfortable with concepts of leverage using to purchase assets. Again, we're looking at financing techniques and financing options. Again, a lot of folks, we're running across this more and more for those clients that have already used their gift exemptions as well. So we have a lot of different options we can use. So when I say financing, a lot of folks, their brains jump right to that commercial premium financing, which we are seeing a big slowdown in the market because of increase in interest rates. However, it can still be a very viable option for some clients. It just depends on the case and kind of what the situation is. But there's a lot of other options as well. So whether we're talking about private financing, or the client making their own personal loan to the trust for the funding of premiums, using assets through an installment sale to the trust, and then using income from those assets to pay premiums can also be an opportunity. We call that a sale to a grantor trust, or SAGIT in other terms. We also see a lot of currently in private split dollar. So with private split dollar, again, we're working under the economic benefit regime. It gives the clients a little bit more flexibility to make annual premiums, not as much of a lump sum loan type arrangement like in a private arrangement. But again, we have a lot of different flavors that we can use depending on who the client is, what the assets are that we're looking to use, and what's really the focus of getting that policy in place. So the one that we're seeing quite a bit more is the wait and see split dollar. Again, the grantor in this case is going to establish the ILET, and they're going to enter into a private split dollar arrangement with that ILET. So the grantor will advance the annual premiums on the life insurance policy to be owned inside that ILET. And then as security for the premium advances, a collateral assignment is placed on the policy for repayment to that grantor. So that collateral assignment would require the repayment to be the greater of premiums paid or cash surrender value. As an interest as the interest component, we use the economic benefit costs, which for a survivorship policy are typically extremely low. And this gives the clients a lot more opportunity to use annual gifting exclusions instead of kind of using those higher interest rates. Again, economic benefit costs are completely interest rate agnostic. So we are not subject to that fluctuation as time goes on, or whatever the market is doing. So again, gives folks the ability to be a little bit more understanding of kind of how that's going to play out over the years without being beholden to the market rates or interest rates. Again, it is an opportunity to pay as you go. That collateral assignment is not determined until the day that it is called or the day that it is due. So it gives clients to kind of pay annually, or to pay kind of as they want for those premiums. So again, they're not locked in, and can be a little bit more flexible on that funding option as well. So really quickly, this is really just to show kind of how it works. So the interest component, again, on a policy with a $10 million survivorship policy with an annual premium of $258,000. In year one, that is $1,400 for that economic benefit payment. In year 9, it's about $6,000. So at that point, we'll use it as an annual exclusion gift, and no interest component is necessary. Again, we always talk about that wait and see, or what the exit strategy is. The opportunity here is that at any point in time, the client can tear up that collateral assignment and make the gift. So if we get to the end of 2026 or 2025, excuse me, and they want to just complete the gift, they tear up that collateral assignment, and the gift has been completed to the trust. There are a lot of other exit strategies as well, using trust assets. We can combine this with other more intricate planning opportunities as well, depending on what's required. So with that, I will send it back to Fitz and close it out. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy. That was terrific. Very informative. I think we got a lot out of that one for sure. And Kelly, I will send you the documents on the tax-ready retirement, as well as the finance options that Tracy just reviewed on her slide. Okay, so you guys
That
can.
would be great. Yeah,
You
and
can
then we'll get them out.
Get those out to
Perfect.
everybody. Well, again, thank you. I hope this was worthwhile for the group. It's again an honor to be part of the Women in Finance. The Roadshow continues, and now it's on a Zoom show. But and great to have Tracy and Mark with us. We appreciate your partnership, CAFL and OWR, long-standing partners to John Hancock. And again, in these markets that we're talking about, John Hancock really is a market leader in the support in terms of our sales support, our ideas, but also with our underwriting, our expertise in underwriting and in advanced markets and all those things that we bring to bear. This is really our wheelhouse. So when you're in these markets, we'll be your main player, and please think of us, and we'll be there for you.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Tracy and Mark. It was great to have you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Juniper. Thank you, everybody.